Good evening, everyone. 25 April 2022. Time for episode 47 of The Last Admiral. And we're going to take up where we left off in the action with the chapter entitled Desperate Action, The Adventure Galley, and Black Powder Smoke. I oppose thee, sea fox, Kid cried. On the sea or in the depths of hell, I shall oppose thee. His shipyard, as water filled the lower compartments, he would get a chance for one volley, or not at all. Pull, oarsman! Damn you miserable dogs, pull, he commanded. Cannons at the ready, Captain, his first mate signaled. Fire at will, Kid ordered. Explosive reports soon erupted from the gun deck. Most were intentional, but others were kindled prematurely by some unseen force, and their rounds ended up in the sea or harmlessly wide of their target. Soon after, an invisible adversary began attacking the gunners. Chaos reigned as men drew swords and slashed at the sinister presence that opposed them. The deafening explosions of the guns rendered Kid unaware of his sailor's troubles. He cursed the batteries whose shots flew wide, but praised the raking of Acklon's sails, the destruction of his amidships gunwales, and the dandy holes blasted in his hull. The bodies of the dead and wounded lay scattered where his explosive rounds had struck. Now it was only a matter of time before they closed and destroyed them. Reload, he commanded, before he heard his sailor's agonizing cries. Looking through the massive breach in his deck, he stared in disbelief as his gunners fought an invisible phantom. Sailors lashed out defensively with their blades in every direction, while it lifted others off the ground, tore them limb from limb, and hurled them aside. Bram, get below and see what the hell is going on. The gun deck was a maelstrom of swordsmen, slashing in an ethereal, barely visible entity. He had heard of such creatures, but his remaining magic could not combat it. Fight on, he urged them. It can be destroyed. Wielding his own staff, he entered the fray. Their fight was savage, and the creature formidable. 4 sailors died, and they reloaded not a cannon until it was subdued. Kid stared at Acklon as their ships drew closer. He could see the rage in the Doc Alfar's eyes at the loss of his crew, and his heart leaped at the thought of the Sea Fox's utter defeat at their hands. The waterline was rising, and his rowers were desperate. He had only one chance left to close with Terribilis and send out his boarding party. Conning, he commanded, just before finding himself transported into a strange domain of shifting walls and complex passages, not unlike the maze of hedges outside his father's estate. He could no longer hear the sounds of battle. He saw neither his ship nor any of the terrain where he had been. He was trapped somewhere by magic, and possibly being robbed of the victory that he had felt was so certain. Coward, he declared, your sorcery will not hold me forever. Acklon did not care what Kid thought of him. His fleet and his crew were all that mattered. A handful of earth and a bit of ocean spray were all that he needed to pound the aft and helm of Kid's ship with a devastating hailstorm. The coxswain, caught at its epicenter, died beneath the onslaught and slumped dead against the wheel. Sailors and nearby knights dove for cover or received serious injuries. Suddenly, the adventure galley turned 3 degrees to port, with a dead man at the wheel, and sped prow first toward Terribilis. The Sea Fox had had enough of this foe. Reaching into his coat, he retrieved a small vial of silver metal flakes, a tiny container of glue, and wiped a bit of soot from his clothing. Casting the items toward the swiftly approaching vessel, he evoked his power. Where once there was a ship, let it now be a flimsy house of wood. The adventure galley shuddered for an instant, and then transformed. Arches in the rigging and on the crow's nest found themselves on top of a creaky, tilting roof, and all of the ship's crew ended up in random rooms of the building, along with all the ship's contents. Devoid of sails or oars, the shack drifted slowly forward, and it appeared that its walls might still draw close enough for an assault. Uncapping a vial of sulfur, he sprinkled some of it into his left palm and added a bit of saltpeter. Acklon pointed his right index finger resolutely toward an open window of the approaching craft, and then an orange ball of light streaked away from his hand, through the opening and into the first floor of the building. Explosive fire erupted within it, slaying everyone in its path and igniting the entire first floor. Flames raged out of the windows, spread up the inner stairs, and crept up the outer walls. Archers on the roof, seeing that all was lost, leaped into the perilous ocean. Bram Goldright stood on the second floor. Looking through an open window in amazement, he had never seen such a demonstration of power. Hurling his own ball of fire at his opponent, his spell burst around a shimmering field, but failed to penetrate or harm him in any way. Face to face against the Sea Fox, he knew that he was no match for him. "Everybody out," he cried. "Abandon ship." With a single word, he vanished and reappeared on the deck of Queen Anne's Revenge. "The galley is lost," he told Captain Teach. "I can see that," he replied, just as lightning struck the burning building. Already weakened as it was by fire, it shattered and fell to pieces into the sea. "The only way to kill the fox is face to face. No Firmish magician has ever bested him. Help me get close to him, and I'll put him in irons." "Perhaps a little more wind will help." Hands raised, Bram controlled the atmosphere around the ship, both gathering and redirecting the breeze to the benefit of their ship alone. "Be ready, knights," Teach said. "We may catch them yet. Where are my rockets? I want more rockets. Fire, more rockets." Acklon could see the water rushing into his ship abaft the starboard beam. The damage was fatal to the ship, but he could stop the water, at least for a time. A priceless gem crushed to powder, his words and his will, and a magical wall of energy formed around the body of the ship like a giant patch made of light. His magic held and pushed back the deadly, swamping ocean. The cliffs loomed directly to their north and south. His new vantage point allowed him to see both fore and aft, into the harbor and out over the sea. Two massive fleets of Firmish warships spread out over more than a mile of ocean to both the north and the south. Flying various pennants of their commanders' family crests, the great white shield of Highwall and the Red Pool monarchy adorned their mainsails. 9 evenly spaced red castles adorned the noble crest, each one symbolizing the 9 provinces and the founding families of Highwall. Their naval formation was a staggered yet cohesive line designed to envelop them in an impenetrable blockade. The Gladiator, Draco Splendidus, and Augustus were the first ships to race toward the last remaining gap of open ocean between their formations, attempting to reach the open sea and escape. Draco Gladius and the Jester were breaking off their attack on the North Fortress and moving to flanking positions in formation with them. An enemy warship, flying a privateer's black flag, depicted a white standing skeleton piercing a large red heart, approached them on the port quarter at unnatural speed, pushed forward, as it clearly was, by wizard's magic. A frigate-class ship, its remaining unburnt sails were full. Numerous Furmen stood at the ready on the deck with ropes and grappling hooks, while others loaded fireworks into angled tubes and ignited them. 2 more damaged warships continued to pursue them off the starboard quarter. In seconds, the leader would close the distance and attempt to board them. His archers fired skillfully from every quarter in defense of the ship. Their arrows claimed the lives of many exposed knights and nearly struck their bearded captain before he took cover. A wall of flame suddenly appeared on the quarterdeck of Terribilis, igniting the mizzenmast and sails and burning a handful of marines. The Firmish mage was crafty. Forcing him on the defensive, he lost valuable time. "Be gone," he commanded, while drawing his fists together before his chest and then suddenly opening them. The barrier of flames behind him instantly vanished, but his mizzen sails continued burning. His opponent was invisible. A bit of drying powder, metal fragments, a simple incantation, and his enemy appeared. Involved in spellcasting, his hair and beard were white, but his appearance seemed too young to wield such power. Dressed in white robes trimmed in red, his hands worked a pattern that he instantly recognized. His spell would create chaos on his ship that would turn marines against each other, or worse. Clearly, the mage did not realize that he was visible. He had nearly released his magic when Aklon's magical lights struck him. 10 orbs hit Bram's body, knocking him down and ruining his spell. Nearly killed, he staggered to his feet, seeking cover, when a second orange-colored beam struck his head. Assailing his mind with its destructive power, he could feel his thoughts slipping away. But he resisted it. Diving behind the cover of several standing barrels, he fought to catch his breath. He had never felt so outmatched in his life. Drawing an enchanted wand from within his robes, he contemplated his next move. Teach was within range now. He had accomplished his goals. Now it was time for the privateer to prove his worth. And the next chapter is entitled Queen Anne's Revenge Engages the Terrible Dragon. "Ropes, planks, and ladders, Furman," Teach commanded. "Prepare to board." "Steady on the wheel, Mr. Garside." "Aye, Captain," Joe replied while steering them on a well-chosen collision course. Easing them within yards of their foe's port beam, sailors, sitting with their legs draped around the bowsprit, were the first to hurl their grappling hooks and tie off their lines. Many fell as prey to arrows and other barbs, but Teach's own archers returned fire, and soon his fighters had dozens of ropes hooked onto the rigging and gunnels of Terribilis. Pulling hard, they brought the ships together and dropped their planks and ladders down. Firmish knights swung across on lifelines or raced across the planks. They soon gained a foothold on the main deck. 2 knights, landing on the poop deck, charged their nemesis with rabid intent. Crashing against the shimmering globe around the Sea Fox, they instantly died and fell smoldering to the floor. Teach had never beheld magic of such power, but he meant to test it himself. "Mr. Vernon, concentrate your rocket fire on their sails." "Those were my thoughts exactly," he replied, while assisting his crew in loading another volley. Adjusting their points of aim, the Sea Fox would soon be dead in the water. Preparing his flintlocks, Teach moved forward through the action in search of a clear shot. Dai Wee defended the quarterdeck with J.W. by his side. Dragonian marines around them drew swords and defended themselves. "We've got to cut ourselves loose," J.W. warned. "There's no time for that now," Dai Wee replied. "Mind the length of my spear." Expertly disguised as his captain, he became the desired target of every knight who came within reach of him. Fighting in the style of Shang Tsung, his spear was like a living thing. The Furmen wore excellent armor, possessed superior training and cohesiveness in battle, but Dai Wee was yet their master. His whipping blade found every weakness, each missing link in mail or breastplate, and exploited it. Furmen, formerly rescued from drowning, were emboldened by the appearance of their brethren, and they joined in the struggle, seeking arms or seizing belaying pins or other objects with which to resist. Bodies piled up around the warrior monk, but more kept coming. Firmish knights entered the fray from every angle, and the air was thick with deadly projectiles. The struggle was vicious, frantic, and bloody. Dai Wei fought to organize the defense, but the fight was everywhere, and few could rally to his call. Discovering the stairwells into the lower decks, a group of knights went below and began the fight anew on the rowing deck. "Kill the oarsman," their leader commanded before cutting down the first sailor who opposed him. Benefiting from the element of their surprise, the Furmen killed a dozen marines before forming a unified resistance. The knights believed that the oarsmen were slaves or indentured servants as they were in Eitzel's navy, so when active rowers left their stretchers, stood unfettered, and drew swords, the Furmen looked on in disbelief. "Turn the guns on the bastards," Jill Saxon commanded. Swiveling their small ballista inward, they slew 3 advancing knights before drawing their swords. "Defend the ship," she screamed as she crossed her blades in order to meet the cleaving sweep of their leader. Beside her, Sang Han and his group charged into the fray. "They don't get past us," Jill implored while dueling. "If they wreck the oars and our sails burn, then we'll be helpless to maneuver." The knight who faced her was powerful but slow. Beaten back by her savage series of lightning-fast thrusts, he lowered his sword, focused his strength, and tried to execute an unstoppable straight thrust. The blade rushed toward her heart with a 300-pound juggernaut behind it. With her dirk in her left hand, she spun around and deflected its force, while slashing across mightily with her rapier. His head flew from his shoulders as his body collapsed, pouring its fluids out upon the deck. Pressing forward, she stood at the base of the port stairs and met 6 knights one by one as they came against her. Fighting savagely, berserk and merciless, with the hero's light upon her, disdaining retreat, and covered in blood not then her own, she held the stair. Beside her, and emboldened by her courage, Sang Han and the gathering marines behind him cleared the deck and secured the starboard stair. "Sang," she commanded, "stay here with your squad. I'm going topside. Don't let any of these bastards get past you." "I'll see to it, Miss Saxon," he replied, and in that moment, with battle's blood in her body and her soul's light shining from her eyes, she seemed more divine than mortal. Assuming command, a newfound courage then ruled his heart. "I want 6 marines guarding each staircase. Everyone else, clear the decks and reload the ballista." J.W. fought valiantly beside Dai Wei. 3 knights fell to his blades, and he threw another 6 into the churning sea. Climbing the rigging, he sought out every disabling grapnel line and worked hard to cut them free from their attackers. Moving toward the nearest rope, an arrow grazed his face and nearly killed him. A Firmish sailor swung across on a lifeline to engage him, and he severed it. Clinging to the rigging, they dueled single-handedly. Skillful and aggressive, the sailor was overconfident. Ducking beneath a swing meant to decapitate him, J.W. ran him through, and he died upside down with his legs still trapped in the ratlines that once held him. A dozen or more ropes and 3 boarding planks still linked their ships. Working his way forward along the rigging, he defended himself when necessary, but freeing the ship was ever his goal. Looking forward, he could see Miss Saxon following his example. And that's about where we'll have to leave off at the top of page 399. We'll return and see if J.W. and Jill Saxon survive this engagement. And the Hero's Light refers to the heroic tales of Irish folklore, where valiant heroes were often said to wear a halo of divine light as they fought against desperate odds. Thank you. May the Hero's Light be upon you. God bless, and have a good night.